does not have a public safety impact that I'm responsible for. For example, if we interdict methamphetamine, we don't say, well, did you come up from this part of the border or that part of the border, because we're trying to decide whether it's our responsibility or not. No, I have fundamental responsibility for public safety in all 9,200 square miles of this county.
Okay, and another question. From my understanding, any equipment that is bought with grant money must only be used during Operation Stonegarden hours for Operation Stonegarden related operations. Is this also correct?
This is also false. The grant does not say that. The grant says that equipment purchased with Operation Stonegarden funding must be used to support Operation Stonegarden activity. That is true. But there is no prohibition in the grant language against using it for other times. And I'll give you an example. The hoist on our helicopter was purchased with Operation Stonegarden funding. No one would expect us to fly over people about to drown in an arroyo somewhere and say, sorry, we cannot rescue you because this is a Stonegarden hoist. No, that's not true. We are required to use that equipment in support of the Operation Stonegarden activities, but not prohibited from using it for other purposes. So the grant language says we shall use it for purposes of Stonegarden, but does not prohibit us to use it for other things. And we have, for the last 12 years, used it for other things as well.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Garcia.
Yes, a couple of questions. In part of your agency responsibilities, in addition to that you have to support CBP's border security mission, it also says that you engage in border interdiction operations, as you know, and they consist of reasonable suspicion stops for potential undocumented aliens, which I hate that word. I think we should come up to.
It's federal.
It's ridiculous, but reasonable suspicion. So your agents are involved, your officers are involved in that. I'd like for you to address that, because that's really problematic. I mean, that's the problem. That's a problem with 1070, that's a problem with all the racist underpinnings of all these laws. But in addition to that, so I don't have to talk again, it relates to what Commissioner Zaida asked you about, because I know these equipments can be used for everything. That's part of the whole of government. If you would tell everybody how this fits into the whole of government concept that the Border Patrol has, that even the Border Patrol chief in the summer admitted that and pushed us, said, hey, this is a whole of government issue. We, all governmental agencies, have to address that.
Okay, we have a two-part question, Commissioner Garcia. The first part is the reasonable suspicion thing. What we need to do moving forward is to have a better handle, because I know intuitively that it's very infrequent that my deputies stop somebody under the conditions in which you just articulated. But we can't quantify that because we haven't counted it before. Moving forward, you have my affirmation before this board that I'll work with you to quantify those things so we know the degree to which those things happen, not anecdotally, but quantifiably. And I think that's important.
After it happens?
Pardon me?
After the damage happens? That's what you want us to do? To let you know when things happen?
Well, we don't count those things right now. I know that it's very, very infrequent because we have to some degree and somewhat ineptly counted these things in the past, but what I want to do is to better do that because now we understand that that is a community concern. I don't think we'll ever be in a complete agreement, Commissioner Garcia, and I understand that. The important thing is that we have this dialogue. That's the important thing. The second part of your question was regarding the equipment. In this current grant, one of the things that's in our request is a flare system, which allows our aircraft to see at night. Now that will be used in support of Operation Stonegarden activities, no question about that. But that also allows us to do a tremendous amount of public safety good for the people of this county. Yeah, it sure does. One of those ways that it does that is by allowing us to not have to pursue vehicles that are fleeing from us. So ground units no longer have to be in active pursuit of a vehicle. Once our aircraft has a fix on that, orbiting many thousand feet above that, unknown to the person fleeing, our ground units can go away from that person. And we could wait till that person drives around for a half an hour and parks in their driveway and then interdict them there without causing jeopardy to public safety. It also allows us to track missing persons and do other public safety goods. So there's a lot of things that will be beneficial to the people of Pima County as a result of our ability to buy that equipment with not taxpayer funds at Pima County, which I'll have to do because ours has reached the end of its service life. I'll have to buy it with some money. But with federal government money, it allows me not to put that burden on the taxpayers of Pima County. And we'll still have use of that equipment.
But that's not my question. My question is about this whole of government. Yes, I mean, I understand that. We have limited money here, and so we're asking the feds to fulfill what Pima County should fulfill. That's what we're saying, right? Because we don't have enough money, so let's use this, what I believe is dirty money, you know, this Operation Stonegarden money, but I want you to address how we fit into the whole of government concept under Department of Homeland Security.
Commissioner Garcia, I'll have to claim ignorance. I'm not sure how you categorize the whole of government. I'm not sure how you're using that term. It seems to be disparate in your estimation that whole of government concept is somehow disparate. So I'm not really sure how you're using that, so I can't respond intelligently.
Well, I think you need to ask the Border Patrol about that. It was Karish was the last one. I forgot who the new one is, but he specifically talks about it, and this is very specific. You've got 4 agency responsibilities, and they're listed here. And we talk about using these funds for the good of Pima County, right? And so that makes us all feel good because, oh my goodness, we don't. But it's all part of this whole of government to do what? To support the border security mission. And I think it's imperative that you know that. That
Well,
this is part of a federal effort to, you know, to get collaboration all along the border, and it's very dangerous to our communities.
Well, Commissioner Garcia, I've been in law enforcement in the Valley for 30 years here. Local law enforcement has always, as a public safety necessity, collaborated with our federal partners, and I don't see that ever changing. Our proximity to the international border brings with it public safety and humanitarian issues that local law enforcement will always necessarily have to collaborate in some manner with our federal law enforcement partners. Not only do they have more resources than we do, I have roughly 500 sworn officers, and Border Patrol has 4,000.
That's our point here, is that the federal government should be doing its own job here, not us, and we should not be collaborating with this federal mission here. I mean, let me tell you, we've had over almost 3,300 deaths along the Arizona-Sonora border. That's what we've had. And it's been security measures that have driven this death, not traffickers, not anything. And it's humanitarian aid organizations that are addressing this issue.
I'm sorry. I don't.
I'm sorry.
If you want to follow up
Just real
and I'll ask a question. Thank you, Commissioner Garcia and Sheriff Napier.
Commissioner Garcia, I don't know that we're better served by turning that over to 100% of the federal government. I think we're better served when your local elected law enforcement person is interjected into that environment so your voice is heard. I think your voice is better heard through me as an elected official, and we're better served when our people, our neighbors, our friends, that being my deputies, are in that environment. We philosophically disagree about that. I think we're better served when the people of Pima County Sheriff's Department are involved. So we will disagree on that element, I'm sure.
Commissioner Heaney, you have a question for
Yes.
Sheriff Napier.
Yes, Sheriff Napier, thank you for being here this morning and your
Thank you.
comments. I wanted to just do a quick follow-up. If you could quantify for us, sir, the approximate number of calls for service we get to assist sick or injured people out in the desert on an annual basis, your department, and unfortunately, how many calls do we get to remove deceased bodies a year? And the second part of that question is, if the board is unable to approve Stonegarden, will that change?
Commissioner Haney, I don't have the exact number, but I do have a percentage. Because we never tracked this before, because again, we're increasing our community awareness here, that starting in March of last year, we began tracking the number of times and the percentage of times that our department calls Border Patrol for assistance. And we know that 85% of that time, it is at the bequest of a migrant who's lost in the desert and requesting assistance. We did not know that before, so the exact number I don't have off the top of my head, but it is 85% of the time. It is a very, very small percentage of the time that we call Border Patrol at the bequest of a deputy that has stopped somebody proactively with the suspicion of an immigration violation. That is a very rare occurrence. And I can quantify those numbers to the board because we are tracking those now. And the second part of your question?
Well, basically, will things change if Stonegarden is not approved? Will you not be able to provide the current level of service that you're providing if Stonegarden is not approved?
Yes, Commissioner Haney, we will not be able to provide the same level of service because I will not have close to $1 million of overtime funding to deploy our deputies into our community to address these concerns. So no, we will be fundamentally handicapped in our ability to proactively be out in that environment to address these things. So yes, the absence of Operation Stonegarden does adversely impact not only public safety, but what we purport to care about, which is the plight of the undocumented. I believe that we're better served if our deputies are out there.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Okay, Commissioner Serrato, please. I'm gonna ask mine last.
All right, just so, Sheriff, you keep discussing further working with the community in the future and having us be at the table and keeping you accountable and having these conversations continue to happen. What reassurances do you have from Supervisor Steve Christie and Miller, who pulled the very first public stunt by he pulled his commissioners out of this commission so that we actually couldn't do our job, and has continuously called us all sorts of terrible things in public during his meetings. So if by any chance this gets approved, do you have any reassurances that we'll even continue to have a forum after this? I mean, he brought them back for this vote particularly. So how can we have community dialogue when we have two of our supervisors pulling public stunts like this? Do you have any reassurances from them?
Commissioner, I am responsible for being the sheriff of Pima County. The supervisors are responsible for being supervisors. They're your elected officials in that capacity. What I have given you is my affirmation that if we move forward with Stonegarden, I, independent of the Board of Supervisors, want this body to continue to exist because I find value in you, even when we disagree, as I know I always will probably disagree in some measure with Commissioner Garcia and many of you. That disagreement should not be threatening any of us. So you have my support in the continuance of this body at my direction as the sheriff of this county, that you will have input with me, independent of any other political influences. We will sit down once a month. We will decide what we want to count. What is transparency? We'll define what transparency means to us. And then I will provide you with information that assures you that we have that level of transparency, but that will be independent of other political influence, because that's my execution of the duties of my elected office, independent of the actions of other elected officials. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, but you would agree that the commission would be at stake, because this commission, this body itself, may be once again disabled by our supervisors. So this would not be a guarantee that we would have this place to discuss.
No, I live my life looking out the windshield, not the rearview mirror. Out the windshield, what I see is this body taking a deep breath, laying politics aside and some other concerns, recommending to the Board of Supervisors approval of this grant, and then you have my affirmation that I then will reconstruct this body, that we will have a manageable number of commissioners, that you will have direct interaction with me on a monthly basis to discuss these concerns. And no Board of Supervisors member or other political influence will interrupt that, because that will be in my direction, independent of all the other political influences. We, meaning the sheriff and this body, however it's comprised at that point, we'll work together to address these concerns. You have my affirmation on that fact, because I do find value in this. Sometimes I feel like a pinata, but that's okay, that's fine. And I don't mind that, because I think in that dialogue, good things have come to us. And I don't want us to, and to your point, I don't want us to get this up. We're moving forward, we're doing positive work here. Why would we want to not do that? Let's not give up on this. It's too important.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Thank you. Thank you for providing all the data in regards to Operation Stonegarden. To look further into this, we didn't see the entire operation from the Sheriff's Department, and usually when we have seen Operation Stonegarden done in other counties or other departments, we get to see the numbers so we can compare how much of that percentage does have an impact on the department. So if that could be taken into consideration, if we're going to see this every year, I would like to see the, or is something that you can provide maybe in the next, for us to see the next meeting, that would be great. But just to compare the number of operations.
Well, Commissioner Rodriguez, to that point, what I aspire for us to do is to move Stonegarden forward, and then you tell me what data points you want us to count. And we're going to have to count those independent of the DARs. The DARs are going to be separate from what we count locally in my way of providing transparency to this body. So if we decide that we want to count a certain thing, I will instruct my deputies to count that in a way that I'm sure that that is exactly what's being counted. And then, as I previously stated, we'll come together each month. Let's not wait for an annual report, that's too long. Let's come together each month and report on these things.
Thank you. You have provided 6 months from last year. That should be used to collect, at least to compare from last year, not necessarily with the future grants. I have multiple questions, so I would prefer to have just the answer and not personal statements or political statements, and I'll appreciate that from you.
Okay.
Is the sheriff operating under 2019 Stonegarden grant, and if so, since when? And the reason why I ask is because 2018, when the board of supervisors said that they were going to overview it before approving it, you still operated. So I just want to clarify if you are operating under 2019 Operation Stonegarden at the moment.
The short answer is no.
Thank you. Under what circumstances we will see the sheriff's department and CBP collaboration?
I'm sorry, say that.
Can you tell us under what circumstances are we going to see the sheriff's department in collaboration with CBP?
In those instances where public safety in Pima County and our operations with those federal officials intersect.
Can you define those?
There could be a good many of those times. So I can't give you a broad brush definition of when all those would be. We interact with our federal partners on a broad array of law enforcement activities, the rescue of migrants being one of those things. Often, because there's such a presence of Border Patrol agents in the western part of our county, they'll interact with us on things like they witness drunk drivers, any number of things. So there are a whole number of things that we would interact with them on. I don't think there will be any fundamental difference from that, from the manner in which we've interacted with them for the last several decades.
Thank you. Can you define under what circumstances is the sheriff's department assisting doing a traffic stop, an illegal traffic stop, and contributing to the detention of families?
We never conduct illegal traffic stops. If you have an example of one, bring that to me and I'll address that.
Okay. The reason I asked, and I would like to hear you answer, or what's your procedure in this case, but we got to see an illegal stop done by DPS that resulted in a call to Border Patrol. Then we had your DPS show up.
You're referring to the stop about a week ago?
March 19, 2019.
Okay. I can speak to that because that's a specific example. My deputy responded because a federal law enforcement officer was requesting assistance, not to facilitate any of the federal law enforcement activity. That's the same manner in which Chief Magnus said that his personnel responded as well. It was at the bequest of a federal law enforcement officer requesting assistance, not to facilitate or augment the execution of that federal law enforcement officer's activity.
Just for clarification, TPD officers were standing at the corner of 9th and 22nd. Your officers came into the streets and actually helped detain the family. Do you know those details? Was what our report provided, our case provided?
My understanding is that my deputy, I think there was only a deputy there, was there to ensure the safety of a federal law enforcement officer, which we will do 100% of the time.
So safety of federal agents comes first before constituents of Pima County.
We will always, and I'll be unapologetic on this, we will always work to protect federal law enforcement officers. I cannot imagine a condition under which this commission would suggest that we would do otherwise. So when they request assistance from us, we have an affirmative responsibility to respond to that, and we will.
Thank you. Under what circumstances are we going to see Border Patrol and Sheriff deputies hanging out together?
Define hanging out. I don't know what you mean by hanging out.
Let's say Sheriff's vehicle with a Border Patrol vehicle next to each other.
There could be a number of reasons why that would occur. The transfer of intelligence information about potential drug trafficking or human trafficking in the area. They could simply be talking about the national championship basketball game tonight. There's a number of reasons why two people might stop and talk to one another. I certainly would never try to prohibit that interaction because the sharing of intelligence information has a criminal justice nexus to it that is important. So the idea of hanging out or casual conversations is not something that concerns me a great deal.
And then for the purpose of being efficient and strategic with the money that is being invested, how many do you think that you can give us a number or a number of times that this will happen under Operation Stonegarden?
That people have what now?
That we are going to see just sheriffs hanging out with CBP talking about a basketball championship under Operation Stonegarden.
Well, the basketball championship is tonight, so I assume that tomorrow there would be a lot of discussion about that. But no, we will always interact with our federal partners. We have to exchange intelligence information and operational information, if for no other reason than public safety reasons, but also because in that environment, there are a lot of federal agents running around out there, my deputies are running out there. From an officer safety standpoint, the right hand has to know what the left hand is doing. So we will always have to interact with them. Even if you reject Stonegarden and we get no Stonegarden funding, nothing about that will change. We'll still have to interact with them for public safety reasons and officer safety reasons. That just will never change. So rejection of this will not ameliorate that concern.
All right, thank you. And as the person heading the Sheriff's Department, are you collating the data when we see the presence of CBP hanging out with the Sheriff's Department, with the Sheriff officers?
If this body were moving forward, if this body somehow would like me to somehow quantify, first we'd have to define what hanging out means, and then we could quantify that, and that is what you deem to be part of the transparency picture moving forward. Let's recommend approval of the grant, and if there's a way that I can count that, bring it to the board, I will.
All right, thank you. And then another question is in regards to more data that you submitted. From the people that were actually taken into custody and that resulted in taken into custody, how many of us, or what's the percentage, two pieces to that. For how long do you detain people in your jails when they result on a sheriff traffic stop and CBP gets called? The sheriff, I'm assuming the sheriff deputy takes it to the jail and then they're taken into custody, arrested, they serve time. What's the average time that a person who's waiting in there before its release is? And then how long do they stay when there is you said that ICE is no longer in the jail?
They no longer have office space in my jail now.
Okay, so for how long do you keep them in jail if they have been flagged by CBP. And then where are the transfer rates on that? Because we don't see that here, and that contributes to the pipeline of criminalization, detention, and deportation of folks. So all of that's connected with the federal agents.
Okay, those are good questions. First of all, the Sheriff's Department does not decide in any manner when someone is released. That's part of the prosecutorial process. We don't arbitrarily decide someone should be released and someone shouldn't. That comes from the court. So that would vary widely on a multitude of factors of how long somebody might be detained in the jail. But we, meaning the Sheriff's Department, have nothing to say about that. Your second question was in respect to ICE detainers. Now, contrary to popular belief, we have very, very few people of the 1,900 people in our jail that have ICE detainers. Generally, it is about 2% of the population, somewhere around 40 or 50 people have ICE detainers. The vast majority of those people, I would say 85 to 90%, are in jail on felony charges, and they will not be released. So the ICE detainer is a moot point. The final part of your question is, how long do we detain somebody based on an ICE detainer? Based on solely the existence of an ICE detainer, is that your question?
Correct, so somebody who doesn't have a criminal record or has been accused of a crime, how long do you keep them in custody?
Okay, that's a little different than what you just said, but
Okay.
I think I understand what you're getting at. We do not decide how long somebody remains in custody. We will not detain somebody, let me be clear on this. An ICE detainer has no force and legal effect for me to detain somebody 1 minute past the state or the county's criminal justice need to detain that person. So we don't detain anybody, any length of time, based on an ICE detainer, period. We do not, I don't have the legal authority to do so. An ICE detainer is not a binding legal document that provides me, in the advice of my legal counsel and of the National Sheriff's Association, also Major County Sheriff's Association, does not allow me the legal ability to detain somebody based on an ICE detainer. Some sheriffs are finding ways around that. We are not.
Okay. So in case that I got stopped by an officer and I was taken into custody because I'm undocumented, and I go inside your jail, I see the judge, they tell me I have a bond for $1,000, my family pays the bond for $1,000, but now it's been flagged that I'm undocumented, what happens?
That would depend on whether or not ICE has put a detainer on you or not. Assuming there's no ICE detainer, you're released. Because we have no criminal justice reason in Pima County to maintain custody of you anymore. Again, that's a decision made by the court, not by the sheriff.
Okay. So how does the ICE detainer comes through? How you know which one is in and which one is not?
We transfer information, as we're required to ICE, and then they transfer back to us a detainer. And again, this is very infrequent. I think there are maybe 40 or 45 out of 1,900 people in the jail, so this is not a frequent occurrence. I know people think it is. I go back east and talk to sheriffs, and they assume that 95% of my jail must be undocumented persons, and that's simply false. There's only about 5% of the population of our jail at any given time are people that are not U.S. citizens, and that could be people from any number of countries. So the idea that the jail is overrun with people that are not here with proper documentation is simply false. That's not true. The ICE official will convey to us a detainer when Pima County no longer has a criminal justice reason to hold this person. We notify ICE that this person will be released. It's up to ICE to then come to the jail and take custody of that person if that's their desire.
Okay. 2 more and then I'll be done. Okay. Is that part of the 287G contract for you to transfer information to ICE?
The 283G.
287G.
No, I've been very clear on that point. We are not a 287G department. What 287G does is cross-certify my deputies as immigration officers, and that would allow them to honor an ICE detainer as an immigration enforcement personnel. I have made perfectly clear. I think that's bad public policy, and my deputies will never be cross-certified as immigration officers under the 287G program.
Okay. And is there a specific ground that you use to collaborate in this case, in a specific case, with ICE? To transfer information or share information? Or
It's
you
done
just-
electronically, and I believe there's a legal requirement for that, and the statute escapes me right now, but I do know there's a legal requirement that we transfer information to federal law enforcement. We comply with that law. And what the federal government does, the federal law enforcement officials do with respect to the issuance of an ICE detainer is a question better addressed to them, not to me, because that's their process.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Luna.
Just two more. You just said that the rejection of Stonegarden would not change collaboration with federal law enforcement. So I just have a couple questions. If Stonegarden is rejected, are you planning to continue calling the Border Patrol for Borstar?
Absolutely. Because I don't want anybody to perish in the deserts of our county because we, out of some displaced sense of political correctness, failed to deploy the resource needed to save somebody's life. So no, as a humanitarian, I can't do that.
Are you planning to continue interdiction operations with federal law enforcement agencies?
Absolutely. I have affirmative responsibility that is unwavering and I will not yield on. My commitment is to public safety in Pima County. I will not yield on that. We will always have to collaborate with our federal partners for intelligence, information sharing, and to interdict very dangerous drugs and human and sex traffickers coming through our county. And as your law enforcement elected official, I have an affirmative responsibility to do that, and I will not abdicate that.
And last question, if Borstar is rejected, what changes do you plan to make to the budget, if any?
Well, first of all, I have to ask for equipment funded by the general fund of Pima County that the federal government is quite literally begging me to take. I think that's unfortunate. I will still be responsible for the effective deployment of human resources into the operational environment out there to interdict drugs and human traffickers. Just a month ago, my deputies, because they are deployed right now doing those things, interdicted 13,000 fentanyl pills. I assume that no one on this commission wants us to not do that. 13,000 fentanyl pills. The collateral societal damage done by that injection of drugs into the community, not only our community, but nationally. We had 70,000 drug-related deaths in the United States. It transcended auto accidents. We never believed this. That's why, in response to community concerns, we now deploy Narcan. Okay, I do listen. I do pay attention to these things. We just interdicted a couple of days ago 58 pounds of methamphetamine. If you go back 10 years ago, if we did 2 ounces, it was considered a big bust. Now it's 58 pounds. I think the people of this county want my people out there doing this. So we're going to be doing it. Now, whether it's funded by federal dollars or local dollars, I'm not going to yield on my responsibility to keep this community safe. I don't want those drugs in our community, and I don't want those drugs going through our community to do harm all across our nation. The public health emergency associated with the drug crisis right now is pronounced. Too many people are dying. Too many people are suffering the scourge of a lifetime addiction. I've spoken to community groups about this, and just pause to think about this for just a second. All over Pima County right now, little children are going to school, and they're learning their ABCs and their 1, 2, 3s. Not one of those children, not one, is daydreaming about becoming addicted to drugs. Not one. This is a very complex issue, and we're going to be on the forefront of it as long as I'm your sheriff.
So your answer is you would be asking the county for funds, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was an incredibly verbose answer. I do have a little passion for this, I'm sorry, but yes.
Commissioner Rainey.
Yes, I just had 2 very quick questions. The first was regarding if CLEPC was disbanded and you created your own commission. Can you please clarify what the criteria of the people and community that you'd be inviting to participate in this commission?
Well, I hope that's a great question, Commissioner Rainey. What I would hope is that what we would do is take the elements of the current commission and you would decide. It shouldn't be directed by me. I shouldn't be appointing people. It should be the community that appoints people. And I have great confidence in the chair. Despite disagreement with Commissioner Garcia, I think you all could decide to me what the composition. The only thing I would ask is let's not make it unwieldy. Let's not make it 30 or 40 people because that becomes unwieldy. Let's keep it a manageable number, but that should be driven by you on who you think best represents the broad interest of the community.
Okay, thank you. And my last question was, you've spoken quite a bit about humanitarian aid provided by the Sheriff's Department, and I was hoping that you could specify the specific activities when you say humanitarian aid. How specifically is the Sheriff's Department providing humanitarian aid to those in the desert?
Well, I'll give you an example of just several months ago, one of my assistant chiefs was traveling out Ajo Highway with CBS News in there, and someone came out of the desert and flagged the police car down and was obviously distressed, saying agua, agua. This happens very frequently. We know that the high percentage of calls coming into communications that we subsequently call for assistance are at the bequest of migrants. So it's a very frequent occurrence. I apologize, I don't have the number off the top of my head. I think I talked to the new Border Patrol chief a week or so ago. His name's Chief Virel. I think they've done 172 rescues since the first of the year. That's rescue events, not number of people.
Yes, sorry, and I want to clarify. I'm not so specifically asking about the number. I'm asking about the specific activities. What does a rescue look like? Is it simply picking people up? Is it calling EMTs? What specific humanitarian aid activities do they participate in when they're rescuing people?
Oftentimes it's at the migrant surrendering because they've been dropped off by traffickers somewhere in the desert and they're in distress because they don't have adequate water. So a lot of times that comes to us directly. So it really runs the whole gambit of activities. I cannot give you a boilerplate, but that's another thing as we move forward. If you'd like me to parse that data down to be more specific, we can do that, where I could say, okay, there are 5 conditions under which we provide humanitarian aid. How many times do we do those 5 things? But again, that's something that this body could help me better define.
Okay, I specifically just wanted, I think humanitarian aid is a very broad term, and you utilize that, and so I just wanted us to be as specific as possible as to what that means, because I think it can encompass from anything from giving water to people all the way to actually driving folks to hospitals, providing all sorts of other aid. And so I just wanted to clarify what that broad term meant when you said that the Sheriff's Department provides humanitarian aid. And that's it. Thank you so much.
It could be a great number of things. The one thing I do support is Humane Borders. Have a good relationship with them. And one of the things that they've asked me to do, which is kind of a two-edged sword, is to allow my deputies to better monitor the water stations that they have deployed in the desert, because unfortunately they're subject to a lot of vandalism and are degraded often. And I do support fully Humane Borders' attempt to put water stations in the desert to ensure that these people don't die as a result of environmental exposure.
Okay, if there are no more questions for Sheriff Napier, you must take my, Commissioner Estrada.
Sheriff, are you aware that at this moment in Santa Cruz County, the sheriff had to park, I think, 2 vehicles that he bought with Operation Stonegarden money? He was audited by the Arizona, I have the name, by the Arizona State Auditor. So he or the sheriff there can only use these vehicles when his department is collaborating with Border Patrol. Are you aware of that?
I have discussed that with the Sheriff Estrada, and he would be in a much better position than I to explain the full dynamics behind that. But the underlying problem there was that he had received money, and Sheriff Estrada is in a very precarious position with respect to his budget, and I probably would leave it at that. I think he's better able to speak to why those vehicles need to be parked, but I would say they were not being used at all for Stonegarden, and they had several 100,000 miles on them. And the officials tried to follow on that because it was in effect somewhat supplanting. But again, Sheriff Estrada is in a better position to answer that than I am.
So because of that, we can then assume that any equipment that's bought by Operation Stonegarden funds has to be used for Stonegarden and for assisting in border patrol, at least to some reasonable, what's the word I'm looking for?
Percentage, yeah, you're 100% right, yes. That we'd be obligated if we take equipment funded by Operation Stonegarden to at least be able to illustrate some usage of that equipment in support of the Operation Stonegarden mission. That's why they provide us the money. But it does not in any way preclude us from using that equipment for other purposes.
But in the future, if anything like this were to happen in Pima County, then theoretically, anything that's been bought by Stonegarden could then be parked or not used. Can be forced. You can't be forced to not use those unless you're using them with Border Patrol, because that's what's happened here.
Well, one of the problems with the rejection of Operation Stonegarden funding is the federal government could come back to me and say, if you're not going to be part of Operation Stonegarden, we would like our $6 million in equipment back that we've given you over the last 12 years. That would be devastating. Right now, I have a good relationship with my federal partners, and I've asked them to not do that, because we still are a strategic partner with them, even if we aren't Stonegarden. But that's a precarious position, because there's some of the equipment on our aircraft that I could not take off and return to them, and we could end up writing a very big check.
So then that goes back to the question or the notion that this grant is an investment in our community, in our future, in our public safety, if at any point the federal government can come back and say, if you're not using it to help us fully or you're not using it enough, they can take it right back. So is that correct? So.
Well, somewhat. I think you're maybe a little more concerned about that than I would be. What we have to do is be able to illustrate that we're using the equipment purchased with Operation Stonegarden funding in support of Operation Stonegarden mission. All I have to do is be able to illustrate that, which we can do, as long as we're an Operation Stonegarden participant agency. So I'm not concerned that they would arbitrarily come back to us at some point in the future and say, oh gee, we'd like our stuff back. I'm not concerned about that as long as we're doing our part.
So I guess my point is more on the notion that this is for public safety, because the federal government is not giving you this money so that you can better serve Pima County, but rather so that you can help them do their job. And these funds definitely come with the strings attached that do not just say this is just for you and for your community.
No, of course, I've never said that. I'm simply saying there's a collateral benefit to the purchase of that equipment with Stonegarden funding that does benefit public safety in Pima County in an appreciable way.
Okay, Sheriff Napier. So I am interested in which divisions generally work on a Stonegarden deployment. And I'm not sure what all your different divisions are, but I think there's like command staff and patrol folks. And, who generally does these Stonegarden deployments?
It would be generally speaking, deputies. Now, deputies would include investigative staff and others. There could be supervisors deployed as part of Operation Stonegarden, but it's line-level people. For example, I would never be deployed on Operation Stonegarden, or a commander would never be.
Thank you. And I just want to put this one to rest. I know this was brought up during Call to Public. On the Stonegarden grant application, it asked if your department is fully staffed. And how would you answer that?
I don't know any department in the nation right now that is fully staffed. We're at about 92% of authorized staffing. We struggle, like every major law enforcement agency, to recruit, retain. We're in conversations with Arizona Post to modify hiring standards, which have become antiquated and honestly have a disparate impact on people of color, applicants of color traditionally. So we're working very hard to upfit our recruiting to get to 100% staffing. But I won't compromise our hiring standards to get to an arbitrary number. But we are staffed in a way that allows us to provide superior service to people of Pima County.
Thank you so much. And my last question is, a month ago, I received a response from you for my data request, saying that the data I had wanted, which was amount of people turned over to Border Patrol, total arrests, citations, were not previously captured. Do you stand by that statement?
In effect, I know we're parsing language a little bit, but I'm very precise in what I want to provide this group. My department did not collect that information. Only information collected was that information required by the DARs. I wasn't certain that an apple was an apple was an apple. And rather than provide you incomplete or inaccurate information that might be used later in a longitudinal sense to evaluate our activity, what I would rather do is that we decide what we're going to count from this point forward, and then everybody understands that this is an apple, this is how we count an apple, and this is how many apples there were. And that way we're all on the same page. So some data was in a series of DARs in a file, and I wasn't completely confident in that, and we didn't collect that, meaning in an analytical fashion in a database that was queryable. The data did exist, but it was very loose, and I wasn't confident that it was the data that I wanted us to use looking forward, but also that it fully counted all those things that this body was most concerned about. So I want to be sure that I'm always providing you the best data, and that we all understand what those data sets mean, and I just didn't have confidence in that.
Thank you so much, Sheriff Napier. And I would call, I believe that there is the Captain of Communications and Grants in attendance today. I have a few questions. Captain Ponzio, is it? Thank you so much, Sheriff Napier. Really appreciate
just in closing, I appreciate the questions, I do. This is important. And I ask again, humbly ask that you, in your deliberations, recommend to the County Board of Supervisors approval of this grant so we can continue forward doing the good work that is possible that we can do together. Let's make this work. We can lay aside politics, and we can make this work for Pima County. It's important to public safety, and I think we can be a shining example of what is right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheriff.